Neo-Gramscianism applies a critical theory approach to the study of international relations and the global political economy that explores the interface of ideas, institutions and material capabilities as they shape the specific contours of the state formation. The theory is heavily influenced by the writings of Antonio Gramsci. Neo-Gramscianism analyzes how the particular constellation of social forces, the state and the dominant ideational configuration define and sustain world orders. In this sense, the Neo-Gramscian approach breaks the decades-old stalemate between the realist schools of thought and the liberal theories by historicizing the very theoretical foundations of the two streams as part of a particular world order, and finding the interlocking relationship between agency and structure. Furthermore, Karl Polanyi, Karl Marx, Max Weber, Niccolò Machiavelli, Max Horkheimer, Theodore Adorno and Michel Foucault are cited as major sources within the critical theory of international relations. Origins of the Neo-Gramscian perspective. The beginning of the Neo-Gramscian perspective can be traced to York University professor emeritus Robert W. Cox's article, Social Forces, States and World Orders, Beyond International Relations Theory, in Millennium 10-2, and Gramsci, Hegemony and International Relations, an essay in Method, published in Millennium 12-2. In his 1981 article, Cox demands a critical study of IR, as opposed to the usual problem-solving theories which do not interrogate the origin, nature and development of historical structures, but accept, for example, that states and the anarchic relationships between them as Kantian and intrinsic. However, Cox disavows the label Neo-Gramscian despite the fact that in a follow-up article, he showed how Gramsci's thought can be used to analyze power structures within the GPE, particularly Gramsci's concept of hegemony, vastly different from the realists' conception of hegemony, appears fruitful. Gramsci's state theory, his conception of historic blocks, dominant configurations of material capabilities, ideologies and institutions as determining frames for individual and collective action, and of elites acting as organic intellectuals forging historic blocks, is also deemed useful. The Neo-Gramscian approach has also been developed along somewhat different lines by Cox's colleague, Stephen Gill, distinguished research professor of political science at York University in Toronto. Gill contributed to showing how the elite trilateral commission acted as an organic intellectual, forging the ideology of neoliberalism and the so-called Washington Consensus, and later in relation to the globalization of power and resistance. In his book, Power and Resistance in the New World Order, outside of North America, the so-called Amsterdam School, around Kees van der Pijl and Henk Overbeek, and individual researchers in Germany, notably in Dusseldorf, Kassel and Marburg, as well as at the Centre for Global Political Economy at the University of Sussex in the UK, and other parts of the world, have adopted the Neo-Gramscian critical method. Basics of the Neo-Gramscian perspective. In the mainstream approaches to international and global political economy, the ontological centrality of the state is not in question. In contrast, Neo-Gramscianism, using an approach which Henk Overbeek, professor of international relations at the VU University, calls transnational historical materialism, identifies state formation and interstate politics as moments of the transnational dynamics of capital accumulation and class formation. Neo-Gramscianism perceives state sovereignty as subjugated to a global economic system marked by the emergence of a transnational financial system, and a corresponding transnational system of production. The major players in these systems, multinational corporations and international financial institutions such as the World Bank and IMF, have evolved into a transnational historic bloc that exercises global hegemony. The historic bloc acquires its authority through the tacit consent of the governed population gained through coercive techniques of intellectual and cultural persuasion, largely absent violence. It links itself to other social groups that have been involved in political struggles to expand its influence and seeks to solidify its power through the standardization and liberalization of national economies, creating a single regulatory regime. There are powerful forces opposing the progress of this historic bloc who may form counter-hegemonies to challenge it as part of an open-ended class struggle. These might include neo-mercantilists who depend on the protection of tariffs and state subsidies, or alliances of lesser developed countries, or feminist and environmentalist movements in the industrialized West. If a counter-hegemony grows large enough, it is able to subsume and replace the historic bloc it was born in. Neo-Gramscians use the Machiavellian terms war of position and war of movement to explain how this is possible. In a war of position, a counter-hegemonic movement attempts, through persuasion or propaganda, to increase the number of people who share its view on the hegemonic order. In a war of movement, the counter-hegemonic tendencies which have grown large enough overthrow, violently or democratically, the current hegemony and establish themselves as a new historic bloc.